Before the United States existed, before the first European ship crossed the Atlantic, before anyone had ever heard the word America, this continent was home to 60 million people. They had cities larger than London, trade networks stretching thousands of miles, agricultural systems that fed millions, medicines that Europe wouldn't discover for centuries, and hundreds of languages, cultures, and civilizations so diverse, they had almost nothing in common except one thing. This was their land, every single inch of it, for 15,000 years. This is the story of the Native Americans, the most complex, the most diverse, and the most misunderstood people in human history. And what happened to them is one of the most devastating stories ever told. 15,000 years ago, the world looks completely different. The last ice age is ending, massive glaciers are melting, and sea levels are dramatically lower than today. There's a land bridge connecting Asia to Alaska called Beringia, and small groups of hunter-gatherers begin crossing it following herds of mammoth and bison. They have no idea they are discovering a new world, they are just following food. But what they find is extraordinary. Two entire continents completely untouched by human beings, teeming with animals that have never seen a human. Forests, rivers, mountains, plains, stretching endlessly in every direction. Over thousands of years, these first Americans spread across both continents, north to south, east to west, adapting to every possible environment: Arctic tundra, tropical rainforest, desert grassland, mountain. Each group developing completely different cultures, languages, technologies, and ways of life. By the time Europeans arrive, these people have been here for 15,000 years, longer than Rome existed, longer than Egypt, longer than any civilization in the Old World. They are not primitive, they are ancient. And the difference matters enormously. Let's talk about what they actually built, because this is the part that gets left out of every textbook. Around 900 AD, in the Mississippi River Valley, a city rises called Cahokia. It has a population of 20,000 people. Enormous ceremonial mounds, some larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Sophisticated urban planning, long-distance trade in copper shells and obsidian across thousands of miles. In the southwest, the Pueblo people are building multi-story apartment complexes into cliff faces. Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde has over 150 rooms and 23 kivas. It's a sophisticated architectural achievement that wouldn't look out of place in a modern city, built entirely without metal tools. The Iroquois Confederacy in the Northeast creates one of the most sophisticated democratic systems in human history. 5 nations, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, united under a constitution called the Great Law of Peace. Decisions made by consensus, women holding enormous political power. Historians believe the American founding fathers actually studied and were inspired by this system when writing the Constitution. Think about that for a second. The democracy that became the most powerful nation on Earth was partially inspired by the people it would later nearly destroy. The irony is almost unbearable. The Plains tribes, like the Lakota, develop a culture built entirely around the buffalo. 60 million buffalo roaming the Great Plains. The Lakota follow them across thousands of miles, developing extraordinary horsemanship after Spanish horses spread north in the 1500s. Their warriors become the finest cavalry fighters in the world. The Apache and Navajo in the southwest, the Cherokee in the southeast, with their own written language invented by a man named Sequoyah in 1821. The Chinook on the Pacific coast, trading salmon and furs. The Inuit mastering survival in conditions that would kill most humans within days. 60 million people, hundreds of nations, one continent. In 1492, Christopher Columbus lands in the Caribbean, and everything changes. Not immediately, not all at once, but the clock starts ticking the moment European boots touch American soil. The first weapon Europeans bring is not a gun or a sword, it's a disease. Smallpox, measles, typhus, influenza. Diseases that Native Americans have never encountered and have zero immunity to. Within decades of first contact, in some regions, 90% of the population is dead. Entire nations wiped out before they ever see a white face. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. When Columbus arrives in 1492, 90% of an entire population gone within a century. The largest demographic catastrophe in human history. And then the Europeans keep coming. Spanish in the south, French in the north, English on the East Coast, each bringing more disease, more weapons, more settlers, each pushing further into territory that has been inhabited for 15,000 years. The Native Americans don't simply accept this, they fight back, sometimes brilliantly. King Philip's War in 1675 nearly destroys the English colonies in New England. Metacom, the Wampanoag leader, coordinates a multi-tribe alliance that burns dozens of colonial towns and kills thousands of settlers. For a moment, it looks like the colonists might actually lose. But the numbers are impossible. More settlers keep coming from Europe. The diseases keep killing Native Americans. Every treaty made is eventually broken. Every piece of land promised is eventually taken. By the early 1800s, the United States government has a policy called Indian removal. The Cherokee Nation in Georgia has done everything asked of them. They have a written constitution modeled on the American one. Newspapers, schools, courts, they have assimilated into American society more than any other tribe. It doesn't matter. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signs the Indian Removal Act. The Cherokee take their case to the Supreme Court and win. The Supreme Court rules in their favor. Andrew Jackson famously says, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it," and proceeds to ignore the ruling entirely. In 1838, the United States Army forces the Cherokee from their homes at gunpoint, confiscating their property, their farms, their livestock, everything they built. They are marched 1,200 miles to Oklahoma in the middle of winter. 4,000 Cherokee die on the journey. They call it Nuna Dal Tsuni, the trail where they cried. History calls it the Trail of Tears. The same happens to the Choctaw, Chickasaw Creek, and Seminole. Entire nations forcibly removed from ancestral lands, marched west at gunpoint, thousands dying on the way. It is ethnic cleansing conducted by a democratic government against its own declared citizens. On the Great Plains, the Lakota and Cheyenne fight the longest and most spectacular resistance. In 1876, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer rides into the Little Bighorn Valley in Montana with 264 soldiers, convinced he can defeat the native encampment. He is catastrophically wrong. Sitting Bull has had a vision of soldiers falling like grasshoppers. Crazy Horse leads the warriors into battle. Within an hour, Custer and every single one of his men are dead. It is the greatest Native American military victory against the United States Army. And it is the beginning of the end. The U.S. Army responds with overwhelming force, hunting the Lakota across the plains through brutal winter campaigns, killing the buffalo deliberately to starve them into submission. By 1890, 60 million buffalo have been reduced to fewer than 1,000. The entire ecosystem that sustained Plains culture for centuries deliberately destroyed. On December 29, 1890, at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota, U.S. soldiers open fire on a Lakota encampment. Between 250 and 300 men, women, and children are killed, many trying to run. It is not a battle, it is a massacre, and it is effectively the end of Native American armed resistance. The story of Native Americans is not a simple story of conquest. It is the story of hundreds of distinct civilizations, each with their own genius, their own beauty, their own way of understanding the world. And what was lost when those civilizations were destroyed is incalculable. Languages that took thousands of years to develop, gone. Agricultural knowledge, medicines, astronomical understanding, spiritual traditions, entire ways of seeing the world that existed nowhere else on Earth, lost. Today, approximately 3 million Native Americans live in the United States, descendants of the 60 million who were here when Columbus arrived, living on reservations that represent a fraction of the land their ancestors inhabited for 15,000 years. They are still here. That's the thing that gets lost in the tragedy. After everything, the diseases, the wars, the forced removals, the cultural destruction, they are still here. Still speaking their languages, still practicing their traditions, still fighting for their rights. That's the Native Americans.